Welcome to the pod, Sofie. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you on.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
I guess many of our listeners will know from your 5 years at Juventus, but you made the switch to Inter last summer. So how have you found that switch?
Well, I'm very happy to be in Inter. I think we have a great team, and we are definitely building something here. I think I came from Juventus, won 10 trophies in 4.5 years. So of course that was amazing. But here I really like to be part of something that we are building here, and we believe that this year we can be part of the fight in the top. So very happy about it for my teammates and the coaches and everything. So yeah, it's really nice to be here.
Love that. Our listeners may well have seen your name a fair bit in the news recently, and that's because a few weeks ago, over 100 women's players signed an open letter which urged FIFA to end its partnership with Aramco as a sponsor. Now, of course, Aramco is a massive oil company owned by Saudi Arabia, and you were one of the main organisers of that letter. Can you, I guess, start by telling me why that letter was so important?
We think it is an important letter to make it clear for FIFA that this a partnership agreement with Saudi Aramco is not something that we are happy about. We don't think that this sponsorship align with the values that we, especially in the women's football world, we stand for. We have been fighting many years for gender equality, against discrimination, and we stand very strong on the LGBT plus rights. And this is something that we can't see aligned with this sponsorship. We can't see how we can promote Saudi Aramco, which is owned by the Saudi authorities, which still stands for so bad discrimination against women. And jail women, for example, for simply speaking up about human rights and women's rights. So this is important to tell FIFA that this is not right. And then, of course, also the climate part of it. Saudi Aramco is the biggest oil company in the world, with no plans to phase out fossil fuels production of oil. And with this climate crisis that we are in the middle of, we can't see how we can promote a company like that.
What steps, I guess, have you recommended that FIFA take?
Yeah, in the letter we ask 3 questions. We ask how they can justify this sponsorship in the light of the human rights violations going on in Saudi Arabia, and how they can justify the sponsorship given that Saudi Aramco is the biggest oil company in the world. And then we also ask what they think of our idea of creating a review committee with player representation inside FIFA, which is something that we want. So we as players are part of evaluating potential sponsorships to make sure that they align with the values that we in football stand for. So those are the questions that we are asking to FIFA.
They have released a statement in response saying that it values its partnerships with Aramco and that sponsorship revenue is reinvested back into the game at all levels, with investment in women's football continuing to increase. Have you had any more from them other than that statement?
No, we haven't heard anything else. So of course that's not some answers that we are happy with, or we don't think those are responses to our questions. So still we hope that FIFA will respond to our questions, but let's see.
It's frustrating though, isn't it? Because it feels quite like a standard response, and like they haven't really taken on your message. It must be a very frustrating response from them.
Yes, it is a frustrating response, if you can call it a response even. I think during the World Cup in Australia and New Zealand in 2023, the president Infantino, he actually said to us in a speech that we as women's football players, we have the power to tell the men in FIFA what to do and what not to do. So please do it, he said. And well, that's what we are doing here. We have sent this open letter to FIFA because we think this is something that they have to take serious. So we feel like we actually are just doing what he told us to do. So that's also why it's frustrating that we don't get an answer.
Yeah, I guess they tell us women that we have the opportunity to tell them things, but they don't guarantee that they'll listen. I guess. It was reported as well in April that FIFA's deal with Aramco is worth $100 million per year. The idea, I guess, that FIFA are trying to put in people's heads with their response is that football, but more specifically women's football, can't afford to turn down sponsorship revenue of the type that Aramco brings. What would you say to that? Because I feel like there are examples around the world of where maybe clubs or brands are approaching women's football in a different way. That is an option.
Yeah, I think it's difficult for me to tell anyone that, if FIFA drops this sponsorship, then there's no money in football, for women's football. I think that's absurd. Of course, there are other possibilities to find to have sponsors that invest in women's football. I think with all the high transfer sums we hear about, with all the high salaries we hear about, I don't think that dropping this sponsorship will mean that there's no money in football, women's football. I also think it's important, to stand in solidarity with the women of Saudi Arabia. We can't just take this money on expense of the women of Saudi Arabia and the people in general, whom we really want to have human rights as well. That's really what we want for the people of Saudi Arabia. But accepting this money is like we are accepting the situation as it is now in Saudi Arabia, where there's still a male guardianship system, for example, where it's an obligation for women to have a male guardian. I think that's just so much discrimination against women. This is not something that we can accept and promote as female football players. And also, FIFA has a human rights policy itself, which I think it's great. I think it's great that FIFA has this human rights policy, but we also need to stand up for those values when these sponsors offer a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did the letter first come about? How do you kind of organize something like this between so many players all over the world?
So Tessel Midag and Katie Root and I, we came together and started writing this letter. We got a lot of support from the organization named Athletes of the World. We started writing the letter and also got advice from human rights organizations, and especially an activist, female activist from Saudi Arabia, Lina Al-Hadlul, whom we asked a lot of, what are her thoughts on this, just to make sure that we didn't do anything wrong. Of course, the letter is from us, the players, but of course, I think it makes sense to ask human rights organizations and people from Saudi Arabia what they think about the facts, the argumentation and stuff in the letter. So we wrote that, and then we started to send it to players, around the world. And of course, the strategy was to contact all the players we could get in contact with through our own network, and then ask people to pass it on to the next one, and stuff. So that's how it developed. And of course, we haven't been able to reach all female football players in the world. The letter is still open for signatures if anyone hears this and wants to join. But that's how it developed.
And did you find when talking to players and asking them to sign that those who signed were very willing to do it, or did you need to talk through it a little bit more with them? Like, what was that conversation like?
Well, with the letter, we also sent a fact sheet and a small video and stuff. But of course, we were open to answer to questions, and some of the players had some questions to us, and which I think it's great. That's fair. I understand that people want to be clear of what is it that you're signing. So many were just like, yeah, I will sign it, no problem at all, and some needed a little more information.
I guess it's difficult sometimes when you're putting your head above the parapet, and what people often, I guess we've seen some of the conversations around sports washing and the pushback from people you see when you try and raise these issues. So I can understand maybe it's a little bit difficult, but to get so many players to do it is incredible. And I guess, we see that a lot in women's football, that players are often willing to stand up for these kind of issues.
Yeah, definitely. As I said in the beginning, we have been fighting for gender equality for many years, and for like being part of football with the same under the same circumstances as the men's football. So I think we are kind of all activists in women's football because we have been fighting for so many years. So I think that's then hearing that we might be part of covering up violations against women in Saudi Arabia. I think that's something that touches many female football players, because we ourselves, we know how it is to be discriminated against, because we have been fighting against that for many years.
And I guess, I was going to ask, do you think players have the power to kind of change these big things? But I guess when you look back at maybe where women's football was many years ago, there has been progress, and that is generally player-led. So that must give you hope that players' voices can change these things.
Yeah, I'm always hopeful. I think if you're not hopeful, then you don't do anything. Then you just sit back. So yeah, I have hope for this. But of course, we can't change it alone. We really need support from all kind of places. I think, as I have read in the news, the media and stuff, that many grab this letter and say, okay, the women have been speaking up. Okay, now we move on from this because we agree with the women, and that's just great to see all those organizations that are now supporting us, and of course, like hearing from an activist like Lina Al-Hadlul, that she's very, very happy that we are now speaking about the violations taking place in Saudi Arabia, that is very important, that we are not silent, that we are not brought to silence. So I'm hopeful. Of course, we can't change something from one day to the other, but I hope this is a first step forward.
What would you say to those voices who say that, football should stay out of politics, and I put that in inverted commas, or, and I've seen this a lot when we've spoken about stuff on our channels, well, what about this? And if you're going to talk about that, then what about this? That it's whataboutery, I guess it's called. And it's that idea that, like, if you can't change everything, then what? Nothing changes. It's so important that we take these, just because we can't change everything doesn't mean we don't try and change something, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point. Like, we can't change everything. We know that there are so many crises in the world, and if we move on to the next problem, then there's always another problem to solve. And people saying that sports should stay out of politics. Well, football and sport is already politics, and it is a political choice that FIFA has made, making a partnership with Saudi Aramco. So we are already part of politics, and I think we already see sport and football as something that can change the world to the better. We are part of so many campaigns against discrimination, against homophobia, and I think that's really, really great. I really applaud that fact, and I know that football can be used for the better. But then we also have to stand up for those values when it's difficult.
Yeah, I guess like you can't just pick and choose what suits you that you want to support, and then, you know, close your ears to other things, I guess is one way of looking at it. FIFA said in May that it's agreed to set up a women's players committee, which we haven't seen yet, but what would you like to see an organisation like that achieve?
I think it's great if we as players could be part of decisions made in FIFA. And I think we have the right to be heard. You have to understand that it's us, the players, who are playing with the sponsors on the T-shirt. It's us who are on the face of those sponsors and promoting them. So I think we have the right to be heard on this. So that's why we want this player representation.
When you look at men's football, for example, and kind of the lack of power maybe that players have over so many decisions, including things like fixture congestion, which of course is something that we deal a lot with in the women's game as well. Does that motivate you to stand up for players' rights in the women's game, but also, I guess, to make sure that it doesn't just follow the path of the men's game, where you almost, it goes so far, so fast, so far with the men's game that they almost feel like they no longer have a choice to stand up? Is that something that kind of you really want to make sure doesn't happen in the women's game?
I think the fact that men's football came before women's football, it makes it easier for us to do things differently in the women's game. So I do hope that players can have more to say in the future, not only women's players, but also men's players, that we are part of the decisions. The match calendar, as you say, is important, that we are, the players' views are heard. But yeah, again, also with these sponsorships and what football should be standing for, I think that's really important. And yeah, for me, freedom of speech is just so important. We need to keep that right. It's of course also that right, that one of the rights that we are fighting for in Saudi Arabia, that we mentioned in the letter, that these women in Saudi Arabia are not allowed to speak up like we do with this letter. So freedom of speech for players, for everyone in the world, I just think that's really important.
Absolutely. You've also been involved in another very important campaign last summer. You led 44 players at the World Cup in a scheme where they donated to climate initiatives. Football, of course, is a very global sport, and the World Cup, of course, is in Australia and New Zealand. What changes do you think will need to happen to make the game more sustainable? Because I remember when that came out, and I remember thinking, like, there's some really small things you could do that would just make something like that more sustainable. Maybe a group stage is in one place. And, you know, there's just little things then that just slightly reduce the travel in such a big country.
Yeah, definitely. Of course, the World Cup has to be played somewhere. And if it's in Europe, then players from outside Europe, they still have to travel far. But the point of not making the distances too long when playing the group stages, for example, is a really good idea, and making it available to take train, for example. I think that's also important. I wouldn't mind if UEFA or FIFA made rules about when the teams are allowed to take flights, to make the rules equal for every team. I think that's necessary, because transportation by flight is far the biggest part of the pollution in the football industry, not only for the players but also the fans that are traveling to support. So thinking about where do you put the games and stuff, I think that's really important.
Yeah, because I remember during the tournament, some of the messaging from FIFA around sustainability and climate change was that, the buses were free and, they were encouraging you in some areas maybe to walk to the stadium. Not always possible in a country that big. I think if I'm right in thinking, Ireland flew something like 8,000 kilometers in just their group stage, so like there is thought going into it, but is it enough? Is it doing more than just, a nod to sustainability? Is it legitimately a concern, I guess?
No, of course, the first step is to recognize that there is a problem, and then the next step is to take the action, and the action needs to follow. So yeah, I think I'm quite worried about the future tournaments, because it doesn't seem like the transportation by flight will be less in the next tournaments, both for women and men. So I think we need to keep pushing for action to take place. I think with the climate campaign that I led last year, I think one part of it was, of course, to show that you can somehow take responsibility of your flight by offsetting, donate money for climate projects. But we also made it clear that, of course, it's better that we don't fly, or that the flight is sustainable with the green fuels and stuff. But what I also think it was important about the campaign is that we show that this is something that worries us. The climate changes is something that we are concerned about. So we really do support that there are made structural changes within the FIFA, the UEFA system, like everywhere, that this is something that we support. I think it's important in the fight against the climate changes that also from bottom up, that we show the top that there is support for changes to take place.
Yeah, because it feels like a lot of tournaments now, the route that they're going is multi-country tournaments, which not only bad for the climate, not great for fans either. And, you look at the next World Cup in Brazil, a country that is heavily impacted by the climate crisis as well, and you wonder in the next kind of few years, is that something maybe that will be recognized? And maybe this time they'll say group stage stays in one place, and it just like minimizes a little bit some of those potential issues.
Yeah, every step taken is important, and yeah, as you say, Brazil is really affected as well by the climate changes. I think that's another point that is important to tell, that also football is affected by the climate changes. Like, it's not that we play on a different planet and nothing affects us. It's also the future of football that's at stake. We already see that grassroots football is affected with like games and training sessions being cancelled because of flooding or fires, and also on the professional level we see that matches are cancelled. So the future of football is also at stake. So everybody has an interest in being part of this fight against the climate changes.
Absolutely. Returning to your career, you had a serious head injury that kept you out of the game for a year, all the way back in 2016 when you were at Rosengard. Looking back, has that made you feel even happier, or maybe just kind of even value even more coming out onto a football pitch and playing professionally every week? Yeah,
I think so. Yeah, I was out for a year almost, where I was just in my bed almost all the time. And I also, like, coming back from that, I was really proud of myself. I am still proud of myself for going through that period. and yeah, I definitely appreciate every day that I can play football. Also now when I've turned 32 years, I know that I will not play 10 years more. So I really try to enjoy every day. And yeah, I just see so many players also around me that have been fighting a lot through their career with injuries and yeah, not seeing family and friends and stuff. I just think we are doing a lot to stand here where we are today. So I'm just very proud of being part of a group of players, female football players who are so strong-minded. Yeah, and I'm just happy myself to be able to play still.
Yeah, you absolutely should be very proud. If you had one message to offer footballers right now, what would it be?
I always say when I talk to young players that they should enjoy playing football. If they want to be professional, then they should know that there will be sacrifices, there will be hard times, but what you can achieve is something really good. But also, even if you don't make it to a professional level, there's so many things to learn from football about team spirit, health, and yeah, you develop so much. If you play at a higher or lower level, it doesn't matter. There's football. Football gives so much. So enjoy it and know that there will be sacrifices also.
Well, I want to thank you for joining me. I think you touched on the sacrifices there you have to make just to be a professional footballer. For you to then be willing to lead the fight in a number of other key areas that are so important in the women's game, it makes it all the more impressive that you're willing to fight that hard. And especially from someone who's heavily invested in women's football, people like you should be applauded. So thank you very much for joining us on the episode and for sharing your story. And hopefully more people will hear it and support it.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.